Anna Blake had always been the kind of person who valued her independence. After years of working as a metal fabrication engineer in a city that never seemed to sleep, she finally had enough of the constant noise, the overcrowded streets, and the feeling that she was always surrounded by people yet completely alone. She wanted space. She wanted peace. She wanted a place where she could wake up in the morning and hear nothing but the wind rustling through the trees. When she found a house on the outskirts of a small town, tucked away behind a long gravel driveway with a detached workshop perfect for her projects, it felt like fate. The house wasn't perfect, it needed work. The land was overgrown in places, and the workshop itself hadn't been used for years, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that it was hers. No landlords, no shared walls, no upstairs neighbors stomping around at all hours of the night. Just her, her tools, and the open land around her. It was exactly what she had been looking for. For the first few months, everything was perfect. She spent her days restoring the house, fixing the plumbing, reinforcing the old wooden beams in the workshop, and setting up her equipment. At night, she'd sit on her porch with a beer in hand, watching the stars in a way she never could back in the city. The neighbors seemed polite enough, though she had little interest in getting too close. There was the old man across the road, Mr. Langston, who had lived there for decades and had a habit of sitting on his porch in the evenings, watching the world go by. There was the young couple with 2 kids who always seemed too busy to say more than a quick hello when she saw them at the mailbox. And then there was Karen. Karen was the kind of neighbor Anna had hoped to avoid overly friendly in a way that felt forced, always finding reasons to come over, always asking questions that felt just a little too personal. "Oh, you're working on that old place? Must be a lot of work for one person," she'd say, her eyes scanning the property like she was taking inventory. "You must have a lot of expensive tools in that shop of yours, huh? I bet people would love to get their hands on those." Anna never liked the way she said things like that, half smiling, half watching for a reaction. There was something off about her, but Anna brushed it off. Maybe she was just nosy. Maybe she was just one of those people who didn't know how to respect boundaries. Either way, it didn't matter. As long as Karen stayed on her side of the property line, Anna didn't care what she did. Then things started to go missing. At first, it was small things, barely noticeable. A wrench she swore she had left on the workbench wasn't there when she went to grab it. A roll of sandpaper she knew had been in the drawer was suddenly gone. At first, she chalked it up to stress, to long nights working on projects and not paying enough attention to where she put things. But then it got worse. A whole set of precision drill bits disappeared. A brand new welding mask she hadn't even used yet was suddenly missing. And then, one morning, she stepped outside and saw that the lock on her workshop had been tampered with. It wasn't broken, but there were scratches around the keyhole, as if someone had tried to force it open. That was when she knew this wasn't her being forgetful. Someone was taking her things. Her first instinct was to install cameras, but she hesitated. If whoever was doing this was careful enough to not break anything, they were probably smart enough to avoid being caught on a basic security system. Instead, she opted for something less obvious. She installed motion sensor lights around the workshop and placed small, almost invisible markers on her tools, tiny engravings that only she would notice. If anything else went missing, she'd know for sure. The following week, her suspicions were confirmed. A socket wrench vanished overnight, and 2 days later she saw it, sitting in Karen's open garage, mixed in with a pile of other tools. The engraving was right there, clear as day, but when she confronted Karen, the woman only laughed. "Oh, that? I found it out by the curb a few days ago." Thought someone had thrown it out the way she said it, so casual, so dismissive, sent a chill up Anna's spine. It wasn't just about the wrench, it was the way Karen looked at her, like she was daring her to argue. Like she knew Anna couldn't do anything about it. Anna decided to let it go, just for now. She wasn't about to start a war with the neighbor over a wrench. But she knew one thing for sure: this wasn't some innocent misunderstanding. Karen had taken it. Which meant she had probably taken other things, too. Anna just had to figure out how to prove it. That was when things escalated. One evening, Anna was out in the workshop finishing up a project when she heard something, a rustling noise, just outside the window. She killed the lights immediately, pressing herself against the wall, listening. Footsteps. Someone was out there, creeping around in the dark. Her heart pounded as she reached for the tire iron she kept by the door. But before she could move, the footsteps retreated. By the time she got outside, flashlight in hand, there was no one there. Just the wind, blowing through the trees. But the next morning, she found something that sent a wave of cold rage through her. A long, deep scratch ran along the side of her truck. Someone had keyed it. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, stretching from the front fender all the way to the back. And sitting on the hood, placed there like a goddamn trophy, was a single, rusted nail. That was it. She wasn't just being stolen from, she was being targeted, and she had had enough. That same day, she drove into town and bought everything she needed. Reinforced locks, new security measures, and the most important thing of all, a high-voltage electric fence system. It wasn't lethal, but it was more than enough to send a message. If someone tried to get onto her property again, they were going to regret it. She spent the entire weekend installing it, running wires along the perimeter of the workshop and reinforcing the gate. By the time she was finished, she felt a sense of control she hadn't felt in weeks. Let them try now, she thought. Let them see what happens. She didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, the motion sensor lights flickered on. Then came a sharp, snapping sound, followed by a yelp, and then silence. Anna stepped out onto the porch, her heart pounding in her chest. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then she saw it, someone staggering away from the fence, clutching their arm, cursing under their breath. The figure disappeared into the night, but Anna didn't need to see their face to know who it was. Karen had just learned the hard way Anna Blake was done playing games. The following morning, Anna stepped onto her porch with a coffee in one hand and her phone in the other, scrolling through the security app linked to her newly installed system. The footage was too clear to be anything but satisfying. The infrared camera had captured everything: a figure moving cautiously along the fence, pausing to test the wires, then reaching out with what looked like bolt cutters. The second the metal touched the electrified wire, a jolt of energy snapped through their body, sending them stumbling back with a muffled shout of pain. Even in the grainy night vision, Anna could see them shake out their arm, stagger to their feet, and limp away. She replayed the clip several times, noting the height, the build, the way they moved. There was no doubt in her mind it had to be Karen. She leaned against the railing, staring out at the street, half expecting to see Karen emerge from her house, rubbing her wrist or favoring one leg. But her door remained closed. It wasn't until early afternoon that Anna finally spotted her. Karen was in her yard, dressed in her usual leggings, an oversized sweatshirt, sunglasses covering her face. She moved stiffly, walking with an awkward hesitation that confirmed what Anna already knew: she was in pain. A deep, dark satisfaction curled in Anna's chest, but she forced herself to remain neutral. She wasn't about to confront Karen directly. That wasn't how this was going to play out. Instead, she took a different approach. That afternoon, Anna drove into town, parked outside the local police station, and walked inside with her phone in hand. She wasn't naive, she knew how this would likely go. Reporting minor thefts with no hard evidence was usually a waste of time, but now she had something. The officer at the front desk barely glanced up as she approached. "Need to file a report." "Yes," she said, placing her phone on the counter and playing the footage. "I installed an electric fence on my property after a series of thefts. Last night, someone tried to cut through it and got themselves a little surprise." That got his attention. He leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "That's from your security camera." "Yeah. I also have a record of missing items, timestamps of when things disappeared, and a few pieces I've actually found in someone else's possession." The officer frowned. "You know who it is." Anna kept her expression neutral. "I have a pretty good idea, but I'd rather let you come to that conclusion yourselves." The officer sighed and gestured toward the back. "Come on, let's get the paperwork started." She spent the next hour filing an official report, listing every item that had gone missing, including the few she had spotted in Karen's possession. The officer, his name was Deputy Carson, took notes, nodding along as she spoke. "I'll be honest with you," he said, setting down his pen. This isn't the first complaint we've had about her. Anna raised an eyebrow. Oh. Yeah, a couple of other neighbors have mentioned things going missing over the past year, but nothing big enough for us to do much about. People don't usually report stolen garden tools or a missing lawn chair. He exhaled through his nose. But if you've got proof, that changes things. She slid her phone across the table. You tell me. Carson watched the footage again, then nodded. I'll make a visit. No promises, but at the very least she'll know we're watching. That was enough for now. Anna left the station feeling lighter, like she had finally taken control of the situation. But if she thought this was the end of it, she was wrong. That night, something changed. She had just finished locking up her workshop when she noticed something off. The motion sensor light at the far end of the property flickered, struggling to stay on. A quick check of her security feed showed nothing unusual, but a feeling of unease settled in her gut. She went inside, locking the door behind her, but sleep didn't come easily. Hours later, she woke to a sound faint but distinct, a metallic clatter. Heart pounding, she grabbed the heavy flashlight from her nightstand and moved toward the window. The yard was dark, the fence standing tall, unbroken. But then she saw a shadow shifting near the side of the workshop. Someone was there. Anna moved fast. She grabbed the small revolver she kept for emergencies, shoved her feet into boots, and slipped outside as quietly as possible. The air was cool, the night still. She stayed low, moving along the side of the house, keeping herself in the shadows. And then movement. A dark figure near the fence, crouched low, messing with something. She clicked on the flashlight, flooding the area with light. Don't move. The figure startled, whipping around, and Anna's stomach dropped. It wasn't Karen. It was a man. He was in his late 40s, tall and wiry, dressed in dark clothes. His face was partially covered by a bandana, but his eyes locked onto hers with a mix of shock and something colder calculating. He hesitated for half a second, then bolted. Anna didn't chase him. She didn't need to. She just took aim and fired a single warning shot into the dirt near his feet. The crack of the gunshot echoed through the night, and the man stumbled before scrambling over the fence and disappearing into the darkness. For a long moment, Anna stood frozen, pulse hammering in her ears. This wasn't just some petty theft. This was something else. By the time the police arrived, the man was long gone. Deputy Carson surveyed the scene, shining his flashlight along the fence. You get a good look at him. Enough to know I've never seen him before. Carson muttered a curse under his breath. That's not good. Anna crossed her arms. No kidding. You think Karen's involved? She hesitated. The easy answer was yes, but something about this felt different. I don't know, she admitted, but I think she knows more than she lets on. Carson nodded slowly. I'll have a talk with her. In the meantime, if you see anything at all, you call me. She intended to, but as she stood there staring at the fence, a sinking feeling settled in her gut. Someone had sent that man. And if they were willing to escalate things this far, she doubted they would stop anytime soon. Anna barely slept that night. She kept replaying the moment over and over in her mind, the man crouched by her fence, the way he froze when she caught him, the instant calculation in his eyes before he ran. He wasn't some reckless kid looking to cause trouble. He was deliberate. Precise. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he had been there for a reason. The question was, what the hell was he after? She had expected Karen to escalate things, maybe even try to retaliate after the electric fence incident, but this was different. This was something worse. By the time the first streaks of sunlight crept through her window, Anna had already made up her mind she wasn't going to sit around waiting for the next move. She started the morning by reinforcing every weak spot in her security. She replaced the old wooden gate leading to the backyard with a reinforced metal one, installing a second layer of wiring to ensure that no one could tamper with it. She rechecked the camera feeds, adjusting angles where the shadows had created blind spots. She even moved her truck closer to the house, making sure nothing was left vulnerable. But the unease didn't leave her. She needed to know who that man was. Deputy Carson had promised to look into it, but Anna wasn't the type to sit on her hands and wait. She started asking around town, talking to people who might have noticed something unusual. At the local hardware store, she casually mentioned the break-in attempt, watching for any reactions. Most people just gave her the usual sympathetic nods, but one of the employees, an older man who had been working there for years, paused. "You said a tall guy, wiry build." He scratched his chin. "That sounds a lot like Rick Thorne. He's been in and out of trouble for a while now." Anna frowned. "What kind of trouble?" The man sighed. "Drugs, mostly. Breaking into places, stealing tools, selling them off for quick cash. He's bad news, but he usually sticks to empty places, foreclosed homes, storage units. If he was messing with your property, it wasn't random." That made her stomach twist. "So someone sent him," she said, more to herself than to him. The man gave her a wary look. "I'd be careful if I were you. People like him don't act alone." Anna thanked him and left, her mind racing. If Rick Thorne was the kind of guy who stole for a living, then someone had given him a reason to target her specifically. And the only person who had been openly hostile toward her was Karen. But why escalate things to this level? If this was about her catching Karen stealing, why not just leave it alone? It wasn't like Anna had pressed charges. Hell, she hadn't even publicly accused her. Unless Karen wasn't just stealing for herself. The thought sent a slow, creeping dread through Anna's body. That evening she decided to test her theory. She took a risk, one that made every survival instinct in her scream in protest. Instead of reinforcing her security further, she deliberately left something out in the open. A heavy-duty welding machine, something expensive enough to tempt any thief, but with one crucial difference this time: she had rigged it. Inside the casing she installed a GPS tracker, something small and undetectable. If someone took the bait, she'd know exactly where it ended up. She didn't have to wait long. At exactly 2:47 a.m., her phone vibrated with an alert. The GPS was on the move. Anna shot out of bed, grabbing her jacket and keys, her heart pounding as she checked the location. It wasn't heading toward Karen's house. It was moving past it, deeper into town. She hesitated for only a second before making a decision. She wasn't about to chase down a thief alone. That was a death sentence. Instead, she called Carson. "I need you to meet me," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "I know where my stolen equipment is going." Carson didn't ask questions. "Where?" She gave him the location, and within minutes they were both on the road, driving through the quiet streets of town. The signal led them to a run-down storage facility on the outskirts, a place that looked like it hadn't seen proper maintenance in years. Carson parked a few spaces away, turning off his headlights as they watched from a distance. The truck carrying Anna's stolen welding machine was parked outside one of the units, its back doors wide open. Rick Thorne was there, along with two other men, both rough-looking, both clearly involved in whatever operation this was. They weren't just storing stolen goods. They were moving them. Carson exhaled sharply. "Looks like we just stumbled onto something bigger." Anna clenched her fists. "Told you this wasn't just about a few missing tools." Carson reached for his radio, calling in backup. Within minutes, other officers arrived, moving in quickly, catching the men off guard. Rick tried to run, but he didn't get far before he was tackled to the ground. The other two didn't even put up a fight. Anna watched as they were cuffed and shoved into police cruisers, satisfaction settling in her chest. But something still felt off. She turned to Carson. "Did you find anything linking them to Karen?" Carson frowned, shaking his head. "Nothing obvious, but we'll find out soon enough." And they did. The next day, after searching the storage unit, the police found a ledger handwritten, filled with records of stolen goods, transactions, and names. Karen's name was there, clear as day. She wasn't just stealing for herself. She was a middleman, a supplier. Anna sat in Carson's office, staring at the evidence laid out before her. "Well," she said finally, leaning back in her chair, "guess that explains why she didn't seem too worried when I caught her with my tools." Carson nodded grimly. "She's been doing this for a while, and she's got bigger problems now." Karen was arrested that evening, and the moment it happened, Anna felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She had expected Karen to deny everything, to scream and argue and play the victim. But the moment she saw the police, her face went pale. She knew she was done. Anna stood outside her house, watching as Karen was led away in cuffs. Their eyes met for a brief second, and in that moment, Anna saw true, genuine fear. Not just because she was caught, but because now she had to answer to the people she had been working with. Anna almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind her, knowing that for the first time in months, she would finally sleep peacefully. For the first time in weeks, Anna allowed herself to think that maybe, just maybe, this was over. Karen was in custody. Rick Thorne and his crew had been caught red-handed moving stolen goods, and the police had enough evidence to make sure none of them would be walking free anytime soon. It should have been satisfying. It should have been enough. And yet, the unease in her gut didn't fade. She told herself it was just the aftermath of everything. The break-ins, the threats, the constant feeling of being watched. It wasn't something she could just turn off overnight. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. Something about the whole thing didn't sit right. If Karen had been stealing for a while, why escalate things with Anna? Why take such a risk when she had clearly been running a steady operation under the radar? And more importantly, why send someone like Rick Thorne to break into Anna's property? If all Karen wanted was to steal tools, she wouldn't have needed a professional thief to do it. The questions kept turning over in her mind, but without any clear answers, all she could do was wait. She kept her security measures in place, checking the feeds every night, reinforcing the gates, making sure there were no weak spots left. She didn't let herself relax, not completely, because instinct told her this wasn't finished. She just didn't know what she was waiting for. 3 days later, she got her answer. It started with a phone call from Carson. She answered on the second ring, already bracing for bad news. "You might want to sit down for this," he said, his tone flat. Anna didn't sit. What? Karen made bail. For a moment, Anna just stared at the wall, gripping the phone tighter. How? Someone posted it in cash. 25 grand, just like that. No lawyer, no plea deal, no questions. Just walked in, paid the whole thing up front, and walked out. Anna swallowed hard. Who? Carson sighed. That's the problem. Whoever it was, they went through a third party. No name on record, no connection to her on paper. But let's be honest, we both know she didn't have that kind of money sitting around. Someone wanted her out. A slow, creeping dread settled over Anna's skin. And you don't know who, not yet. But Karen's not talking, and something tells me she's not going to. Anna exhaled sharply, pacing the length of her living room. So what now? For now, we keep an eye on her. If she so much as jaywalks, we'll take her back in. But I figured you should know. A sharp knock at Anna's door cut him off. She froze. It was late, too late for visitors. The motion sensors hadn't gone off, which meant whoever it was had come on foot, avoiding the cameras. A second knock followed, this one louder, more impatient. Carson, she said quietly, still gripping the phone. Someone's here. There was a brief pause before his voice hardened. Do not open that door. I'm on my way. Anna didn't plan to. She moved silently, stepping out of view of the windows, straining to hear. The knock came again, then a voice low, male, unfamiliar. Miss Blake. Not Karen. Not Rick. Someone else. We need to talk. Anna's pulse hammered against her ribs, but she didn't move. Whoever he wasn't yelling, wasn't demanding, but there was something about his tone that made her stomach twist. It was calm. Too calm. A pause. Then, I know you're home, and I know you don't scare easy. She didn't respond. He sighed. All right, I get it. But if you want to keep this between us, it would be better if you opened the door. A car engine in the distance, Carson. The man on the other side of the door must have heard it too, because he made a low sound of amusement. Guess that's my cue. Footsteps. Fading. By the time Carson pulled into the driveway, there was no one there. Anna let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Carson was out of the car in seconds, scanning the area, hand resting on his holster. You see him? No. Just heard his voice, you recognize it. She shook her head. No, but he knew my name. And he knew I was inside. Carson exhaled sharply, his jaw tight. I don't like this, yeah, Anna muttered. Joined the club the next day, she found something in her mailbox. No postage, no return address. Just a folded sheet of paper. Inside, 5 words in neat, precise handwriting. You should have left it alone. Anna stared at the message for a long time, her mind racing. Whoever had written this wasn't just sending a threat, they were warning her. But why? She didn't have time to figure it out. That night, the power went out. At first, she thought it was just the storm rolling in thick, heavy clouds blotting out the moon, the distant rumble of thunder shaking the ground. But when she stepped outside and looked at her neighbors' houses, she realized something. Their lights were still on. Only hers had gone dark. Her security system. Her cameras. All of it offline. A cold, sharp fear cut through her, but she forced herself to think. Her truck was still running. That meant the circuit hadn't blown. Someone had done this on purpose. She moved quickly, grabbing the flashlight from the kitchen, checking the doors and windows. Everything was locked, secure. But the fence was useless now. If someone was going to make a move, this would be the time. She didn't have to wait long. A shadow flickered past the window. Anna didn't hesitate. She grabbed her revolver, moving low, keeping her breathing steady. Whoever they weren't trying to be subtle anymore. Footsteps. Then, the unmistakable sound of metal cutting through metal. They were trying to break through the fence. Her muscles tensed, every instinct screaming at her to act, to move, to do something, and then, just as suddenly as it had gone out, the power snapped back on. The cameras flickered to life. The motion sensors triggered. The lights flooded the yard. And standing just beyond the fence, caught in the glare, was a man in dark clothing. Not Rick. Not the stranger from her porch. Someone else. He froze. Just for a second. Then he turned and ran. Anna didn't chase him. She didn't need to. Because this time she had everything on camera. And this time she wasn't going to wait for Carson. This time she was going to end this herself. Anna didn't sleep that night. She didn't even try. Instead, she sat in front of her monitor, watching the footage over and over again, dissecting every movement, every angle, every detail she could extract from the grainy night vision. The man who had cut the fence was careful, precise, moving with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. He hadn't been fumbling, hadn't hesitated. He knew exactly what he was doing. That scared her more than anything. This wasn't a desperate attempt to steal some tools or a clumsy act of intimidation. This was calculated, deliberate. Someone had planned this. She forwarded the footage to Carson before sunrise, including timestamps and every relevant detail. His response came almost immediately: stay inside. Do not engage. I'm sending someone over. She knew she should have listened, but waiting wasn't something she did well. By the time the first streaks of light appeared on the horizon, she was already moving. First, she drove into town. If whoever was behind this thought she was going to sit back and wait for them to make the next move, they had underestimated her. She stopped by the local hardware store and picked up reinforced steel wiring, heavier-duty locks, and additional motion sensors with battery backups. If they thought cutting the power had been a good strategy, they were about to be very disappointed. Next, she paid a visit to Langston. The old man had been watching the neighborhood longer than anyone, and if something was happening under the surface, she had a feeling he'd know. "You're stirring up a hornet's nest," was the first thing he said when she told him about the attack. Anna crossed her arms. That nest was already stirred. I just turned the lights on. Langston sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. You don't get it, do you? This town's got its share of secrets. People like Karen, yeah, they're scum, but they're small time. You start pulling at the wrong threads, and you're going to find something worse at the other end. Anna narrowed her eyes. And what exactly is at the other end? Langston hesitated. That was enough of an answer. You know something, she pressed. I know this ain't the first time someone's gotten too curious, he muttered. And it never ends well for them. That wasn't what she wanted to hear. Anna spent the rest of the day reinforcing her property, installing redundancies in her security system, and making damn sure that if anyone tried to cut the power again, it wouldn't leave her blind. She wasn't waiting for them to come back, she was preparing for it. And they did. That night, just after 3 a.m., her motion sensors triggered. This time she was ready. The lights snapped on, cameras rolling, alarms primed. She moved quickly, grabbing her revolver from the nightstand and making her way toward the back entrance, her pulse steady but sharp. And then, something unexpected. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated for half a second before answering. Miss Blake, the voice on the other end, said, smooth and measured, I was hoping we could have a conversation before this gets out of hand. Anna gritted her teeth. Bit late for that. A soft chuckle. I understand your frustration. But you've made yourself quite the inconvenience. We'd like to offer you a way out before things escalate further. Anna glanced at the screen monitoring her property. A figure stood just outside the reach of her fence, facing the camera directly. She clenched her jaw. And if I say no? Another pause. Then, quietly, you won't like the alternative. Something inside her snapped. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was pure rage. But she was done being threatened. You listen to me, you arrogant son of a bitch, she hissed, gripping the phone so hard her knuckles ached. I don't scare easy. And if you think sending your little pets to skulk around my property is going to make me pack up and run, you're dumber than I thought. Silence. Then, the man sighed. That's unfortunate. The call disconnected, and the power went out. Again. But this time, Anna was ready. Before they could move, she activated the backup systems. Floodlights powered by independent battery sources flared to life, cutting through the darkness like a blade. The cameras stayed live, and this time they caught everything. There were 3 of them. One was standing near the fence, exactly where she had seen him on the screen. The other 2 were moving along the perimeter, searching for weak points. Anna didn't wait. She stepped out onto the porch, gun raised, her voice sharp as steel. You've got 10 seconds to get off my land before I stop playing nice. The one near the fence turned toward her, completely unfazed. Miss Blake, she didn't let him finish. She fired a shot into the dirt at his feet, the sound ripping through the still night air like a warning siren. They scattered. One of them tried to bolt toward the tree line, but Anna wasn't about to let them get away that easy. She fired another shot, this one aimed at the post just inches from his head. He stumbled, then dropped to the ground with his hands raised. The other 2 vanished into the darkness. Anna exhaled, her chest rising and falling rapidly as the adrenaline pumped through her veins. She kept her gun trained on the one who hadn't run, stepping forward cautiously. Who sent you? She demanded. The man didn't answer. His hands were still raised, but there was something unsettling in his expression. Not fear, not anger, just cold amusement. You should have taken the deal, he murmured. Anna clenched her jaw, but before she could respond, the sound of sirens split the air. Carson. The man on the ground didn't move as the police arrived, didn't resist as he was hauled to his feet and cuffed. But as they led him toward the cruiser, he glanced over his shoulder, meeting Anna's eyes one last time. You don't even know what you've stepped into, he said quietly. But you will. Anna didn't look away. I'll be ready. Carson approached, his face set in a grim expression. You all right? Yeah, she muttered. Better than him. Carson nodded toward the man being shoved into the back of the car. He's not going to talk, but we'll see what we can get out of him. Anna exhaled, rolling her shoulders. I don't think this is over. Carson gave her a look. Neither do I. Anna turned back toward her house, her mind racing. They had tried to intimidate her. That hadn't worked. They had tried to buy her out. That had failed too. And now they were getting desperate. Which meant one thing. Whoever was behind this wasn't just some low-level criminal. This was something bigger, and she was right in the middle of it. Anna knew she had crossed a line, but at this point there was no turning back. The moment she pulled the trigger that night, sending a clear message that she wasn't going to sit quietly and let them run her off, everything changed. The men who had come for her weren't just common thieves or hired muscle. This was something bigger, more organized, and far more dangerous than she had originally thought. The fact that they had the resources to keep cutting her power, to send people to her home in the dead of night, and to bail Karen out without leaving a single trace of their involvement meant that she wasn't just dealing with some backwoods crime ring. Whoever was behind this had influence, power, and if they had been willing to escalate to direct threats, they weren't going to stop now. For the next 2 days, nothing happened. No one came to her house. No strange cars parked at the end of the road. No more attempts to cut the fence or break into her workshop. If she hadn't been through hell in the past few weeks, she might have convinced herself that it was over. But she knew better. This was the calm before the storm. The real question was, what was their next move? The answer came on the third night. It started with a phone call. Anna was in her workshop, going through security footage when her phone rang. The number was blocked. She stared at it for a long moment before answering. No one spoke at first. Then, a slow exhale. A man's voice. The same one from before. "You should have left," he said. Anna didn't respond. "You're making this difficult," he continued. "I don't like difficult." She gritted her teeth, gripping the phone tighter. "Then stop wasting my time and tell me what you want." The man chuckled. "Oh, you already know what we want. The only question is how much you're willing to lose before you give it to us." Her jaw locked. "I don't have anything that belongs to you. You have land. You have a property that wasn't supposed to be occupied, and now you've become a problem." Anna's pulse spiked, but she forced her voice to stay steady. "Let me guess. You're going to offer me another deal? Tell me to pack up and disappear." The voice on the other end of the line sighed. "Not this time." A long silence stretched between them. Then he said something that made her blood turn to ice. "Enjoy the show." The line went dead. A second later, the security system in her house triggered. Anna bolted for the door, adrenaline flooding her veins. She sprinted across the yard toward the house, her mind already racing through possibilities: another break-in, another attempt to cut the power, something worse. She hit the front steps, yanking the door open, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then she smelled smoke. Her stomach dropped. She ran through the house, skidding to a stop when she saw it. Flames, crawling up the side of her workshop. A fire, not an accident. She grabbed the fire extinguisher from the kitchen and ran back outside, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The flames were still small, but they were spreading fast, licking at the wooden frame, creeping toward the roof. She barely registered the gravel digging into her knees as she dropped down and unleashed the extinguisher, choking the fire with a cloud of white foam. It took less than a minute. But by the time the flames were out, the damage was done. The side of the workshop was scorched black. Smoke curled into the night air, the acrid stench burning her throat. Her hands shook as she lowered the extinguisher, staring at the wreckage. This wasn't just intimidation. This was war. The sound of sirens cut through the night air. Carson. He pulled up fast, barely putting the car in park before he was out and moving toward her. His eyes swept over the damage, then locked onto her. "You okay?" She let out a breath. "Yeah, they didn't get what they wanted, so they set a fire instead." Carson's jaw tightened. "They're desperate." "Yeah, well, so am I." He studied her for a long moment. "You know this won't stop unless you end it, right?" Anna clenched her fists. "I know." Carson exhaled sharply. "Then it's time we go on the offensive." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "We found something." She took it, unfolding it carefully. Inside was a list of names, addresses, dates. She frowned. "What is this?" Carson's expression darkened. "This is every person who's owned property in this area over the last 10 years. Every single one of them either sold under suspicious circumstances or disappeared." Anna felt a chill crawl down her spine. "And you think?" "I don't think—" "I know," Carson cut in. These people, whoever they are, they've been doing this for years. Forcing people out, and when they don't leave willingly, well, he gestured to the burned wall behind her. Anna swallowed hard. This isn't just about Karen. She was nothing but a pawn, Carson continued. The real players? They're still out there. And they want your land. Anna's grip tightened on the paper. Then let's make them regret it, Carson nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. She turned back toward her house, staring at the flickering embers still smoldering in the air. She was done playing defense. Now it was her turn to strike. Anna didn't sleep that night. The smell of smoke still clung to the air, a bitter reminder of how close they had come to burning her out of her own home. She sat on the porch with her gun resting on the table beside her, watching the tree line, waiting. The fire had been their message. Now it was her turn to send one back. By morning, Carson had already put a plan into motion. He had been working behind the scenes, digging deeper, using every resource he had to pull apart the tangled mess of stolen property, forced buyouts, and disappearances that stretched back years. The people behind it were careful, their tracks covered well, but they weren't perfect. Somewhere along the way, someone had made a mistake, and Carson was determined to find it. And then, just as Anna was finishing reinforcing her front gate, her phone rang. We got a name, Carson said without preamble. The money that bailed Karen out? It came from a shell company. But guess who runs it? Anna's stomach twisted. Tell me, Carson exhaled. Marcus Devlin. The name meant nothing to her. Who the hell is Marcus Devlin? A developer. Works under different business names, all of them tied to the same operation, picking off properties, forcing people out, buying the land for pennies and flipping it for millions. He's been running this racket for over a decade. And no one's been able to touch him. Every time someone pushes back, they either get scared off, or he hesitated, or they disappear. Anna felt something cold settle in her chest. And now he wants me gone. Not just you, Carson said, your land. It's a prime location, but it wasn't supposed to be available. That house was supposed to sit empty until it was condemned. But then you came along and screwed up their plans. Anna let out a sharp laugh, though there was no humor in it. So Karen was working for him, not directly. She was just a useful idiot, someone who could pick through properties, steal valuable things, push the owners towards selling. But when you started fighting back, Devlin got involved himself. And he's not the kind of guy who likes losing. Anna clenched her jaw. So what's the play? Carson hesitated. We can't get him on the land grabs yet, but we can link him to the stolen property operation. The men who came after you, they're tied to him. If we can get one of them to talk, we might have enough to drag him down. But Anna, this isn't just about catching some low-level crook. Devlin has money, lawyers, people in his pocket. If we make a move on him, we have to be ready for the fallout. Anna exhaled, gripping the phone tighter. Then, let's make it count. Carson gave her an address, a storage facility on the outskirts of town. It was one of the places where Devlin's people had been stashing stolen goods before they were resold. If there was any direct evidence tying him to the operation, it would be there. Anna didn't hesitate. She drove straight to the location, arriving just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. Carson was already waiting, a team of officers behind him, ready to move. They had a warrant, enough to search the units registered under the shell company's name. They forced open the first unit, and Anna's stomach tightened at what she saw inside. Boxes stacked high, filled with stolen items, tools, electronics, even personal belongings. It wasn't just about valuable goods. It was about stripping people of everything, piece by piece, until they had nothing left. And then, in the farthest corner, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Her things. Her stolen tools, the welding mask that had disappeared weeks ago, the expensive equipment she thought she'd never see again. Proof. Carson let out a low whistle. This is it. This is what we need. But before they could celebrate, one of the officers called out, "Car." Anna turned, following their gaze to the road. A sleek black SUV had pulled up outside the facility, engine idling, tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. Then, slowly, the door opened. A man stepped out. Tall, in an expensive suit, perfectly put together despite the dirt parking lot and the unmistakable tension in the air. He looked at the scene before him: police officers, an open storage unit filled with stolen property, Anna standing there with fire in her eyes, and still he smiled. Marcus Devlin. Well, he said smoothly, buttoning his jacket. This is disappointing. Carson stepped forward. You're done, Devlin. We've got the evidence, we've got the links, and we've got enough to put you away for a long time. Devlin didn't even flinch. You have nothing but circumstantial speculation. His eyes slid to Anna, and a very persistent woman who doesn't know when to walk away. Anna took a step closer. Oh, I know when to walk away, she said evenly, but not before I watch you burn. Devlin's smile didn't fade, but something in his posture shifted, a barely perceptible tension tightening his shoulders. You think this changes anything? He said. I have more money than you can fathom, more influence than you can imagine. This, he gestured toward the storage unit, is a minor inconvenience. Do you really believe I won't walk out of here untouched? Carson folded his arms. We'll see about that. And then from behind them, another voice cut through the night air. No, you won't. They all turned. Karen. She looked different now, her usual arrogance stripped away, fear written across every inch of her face. Her hands were trembling, but her eyes were locked on Devlin with something dangerous. Anna frowned. What are you doing here? Karen didn't answer. She just stepped forward, pulling a thick manila folder from her bag and shoving it into Carson's hands. I'm done, she said, her voice shaky but firm. I'm done covering for him. Devlin's expression finally cracked. Karen, shut up, she snapped. Anna stared at her. What's in there? Karen let out a shaky breath. Everything. Documents. Transactions. Wire transfers. Names. Dates. It was over. For the first time, Devlin's composure shattered. You think this will stop me? He hissed, eyes burning into Karen. You think they'll let you walk away from this? Karen swallowed hard but didn't back down. I think I've got a better chance than you. And just like that, it was done. The officers moved in, cuffing Devlin as he cursed under his breath, his carefully crafted world crumbling around him. Anna exhaled, the tension that had been coiling in her chest for weeks finally loosening. She turned to Karen. Why? Karen let out a bitter laugh. Because I finally realized he wasn't going to save me. He was just going to let me rot while he kept making money. Anna studied her for a long moment. So what now? Karen looked away. I don't know. Anna sighed. Figure it out. And stay the hell away from me. Karen nodded. Yeah, that's fair. As Devlin was shoved into a squad car, Carson clapped Anna on the shoulder. You did good. Anna let out a breath. I did what I had to. She turned back toward her truck, staring at the road ahead. She had won. But she had a feeling this wasn't the last time someone would come knocking. Next time she'd be ready.